the final meeting of the Economy, Environment and Infrastructure Committee. Can I remind members that this meeting is being recorded and will be available for the public to listen to? Can I also ask you to turn off your phones or put them on silent if you have them? Also, the usual reminder that this is a strategic committee and ward issues should be dealt with by members talking to the relevant officers. Members may be aware that the Vice Chair resigned from the SNP party yesterday, so therefore I'd like to put on record my thanks to Andrew for his support over the last couple of years as the Vice Chair of this committee. I'm sure he will be missed. Can I ask the clerk to give the SEDERUNT apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. Got a number of apologies this morning from Councillors Fairbairn, Justy, Ingalls and Nicol. There's also some Councillor McComb.
Councillor Brodie. Apology.
Thank you. And there's also Councillors Scobie and Sloan not currently present, and Councillor Marshall not currently present.
He is here.
He'll be late.
Okay, so I take it we are quoted. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay, members, are there any declarations of interest? No, okay, we'll move on to item 3 then, which is the minutes of the previous meeting of the 18th of April 2019, and these are for noting. Agreed? Thank you. Item number 4 is the minute of the previous meeting of 14th of May 2019, again for noting. Have we agreed? Thank you. We'll now move on to item number 5, which is the Waste Strategy and Operational Development Report by the Head of Roads and Infrastructure. This Council is committed to deliver its responsibility to tackle climate change, and this was reaffirmed at full Council last week following the establishment of a Climate Emergency Cross-Party Working Group. We all have to act responsibly in ways that reduce the impact on the environment and to fight climate change. This Council has already signed the Charter of Household Recycling in Scotland, and this report provides members with an update and further information on the vision and strategy for the Council's waste collection and disposal service. We're here to seek members' approval for decision on investment to be taken to Policy and Resources or the successor committee following the summer recess, and it's also to provide members with details of the timetable and key milestones, including stakeholder engagement for delivery of the Council's waste collection and disposal service. It goes without doubt, members, obviously we're pleased to see that we had £1.15 million worth of investment over 5 years from SPEN, Scottish Power Energy Network, to get 2 electric vehicles for Dumfries and potentially Castle Douglas, Kirkcudbright, and I'm sure we can say our thanks for that, and hopefully that will be the start of a journey in which we reduce our carbon emissions. I believe we'll save up to 70,000 tonnes of CO2 emissions in the first year of that particular thing, so I'm pleased to see that. The infrastructure manager will take any questions on the report unless you've got anything to add to it. Steve?
No, Chair, nothing to add.
James, have you got anything to add?
Nothing to add, Chair.
Okay, members, for questions. Ivor?
Chair, can we agree this if we don't have a clue what it's going to cost us? Because it clearly says under 3.36, until we find out the Scottish Government whether they're going to back the proposal or keep the funding coming, if it's reduced, it would have to be reconsidered. Now, how can we go to corporate policy asking for cash when we don't know how much we're wanting?
James?
Chair, Councillor Hislop, yeah, that is correct to the point that we need to present to you the most cost-effective service that the council can deliver on, while still meeting the requirements of the code of practice and the legislation. So that's what we're looking to do with this paper, and the information we'll take to Policy and Resources. If we do that, then that puts us in the strongest position possible to discuss with the Scottish Government on continued funding, I would argue. So that's the best position I can offer you at this stage.
Just on, if you look at recommendation 2.3, it gives you that option. It goes to a future policy and resort, or the successor committee consideration of the funding requirements.
Chair, but if you look at the previous point, 3.3.5, further investment requirements to be worked up. So how can we actually ask corporate policy or policy and resources if we don't know what we're actually asking for? You know, this is a half-baked proposal. We need the full figures here. We're not going to be caught with another 2.899 pothole, are we? You know, where we're looking into a gap, millions of pounds spent, and we've nothing there to show for it.
James?
We will present, Chair, to Policy and Resources the costs of delivering the service, including the costs of the investment required at the Zero Waste Park. We're asking this committee to agree that the proposals with respect to the collection service and the need for investment in the Zero Waste Park is required. I see that delivers what's required from this committee, but the final decision on investment is required from Policy and Resources.
Or the successor committee. Katie?
Thank you, Chair. I've got various questions, so I'll try and be as concise as possible. First of all, I'm really pleased to hear the investment on the electric vehicles, and I'm aware of Greenwich Council in London actually converted some of their existing fleet to electric, and I'm wondering if, when we're looking at the purchase of any new vehicles, we may have that in consideration. As I say, I've got various questions, so I was just trying to put them in a concise way for you. Are we also looking at trying to find out or lobby government if there's a single national strategy for recycling? Because I'm aware that all the councils have different ways that they deal with their waste, and is that something that's likely to come forward in the future? And while we've got the deposit scheme coming forward, which is a national strategy, one of my questions is also, if we're going to have community bring sites for glass because of the deposit scheme, why are we not having that same system for metals and plastics? Because metals and plastics will also form part of the deposit scheme on there. There's also no mention of Tetra Packs, and you know, that's as far as I'm being led to believe, is quite an easy material to recycle, and there's no mention of that within the paper here today. So that's a few questions. I might come back at a later point if there's anything else that comes up, Chair, but if I could just ask those just now.
Okay, James?
Thank you, Chair. Just taking your questions there in order. In terms of the electric vehicles, my recollection from the previous committee was that Gordon Bryce advised that at the moment electric vehicles are not suitable for the sort of longer distance routes that we're looking at between charges. So the two that we're getting will be restricted to Dumfries town and another town in the west. And it's an opportunity for a low cost for us to try out that technology. The vehicles that we're looking to purchase are on a 5-year basis. So in 5 years' time, we would be hopeful that technology would be such that electric vehicles would be, or hydrogen vehicles, I think are being trialled in Aberdeen, would be an alternative in 5 years' time. But again, we will be going out to the market in terms of procuring vehicles, and there may be other options between now and when we procure them. We will see. In terms of a national single recycling approach, I mean, it's not something that has been directed by Scottish Government. They set some standards. Not all local authorities comply with the code of practice in terms of commingling within different bins. I think it's unlikely that Scottish Government will look to impose, you know, exact requirements on collection, because different local authorities have different sort of restrictions in terms of, you know, rural areas or urban areas and such like. So I think that is unlikely, particularly with the challenges that the deposit return scheme is putting in terms of resources on Zero Waste Scotland. I suspect they're unlikely to try and do that. They are likely to change the code of practice to reflect the fact that particularly the volumes of materials that are collected curbside will change, so the container sizes will inevitably require to be reduced if there are returning metals and plastics to supermarkets and shops for a deposit of 20 pence. In terms of bringing plastics and metals to community bring sites, the reason why we are using community bring sites for glass is that glass has been identified as a very high return rate in terms of the deposit return. So there's going to be very little glass left in the market. But also community bring sites are acceptable within the code of practice for glass, but only glass. So community bring sites are not an approach that's in the code of practice for metals and plastics. Metals and plastics also quite bulky in comparison to their volume in terms of their weight. So actually the size of receptacles you need to empty them quite regularly, whereas glass obviously is quite a heavy material. So it would be a lot of transporting in that respect or a lot of big containers required. Tetra Paks is something that we can look to recycle within the waste stream. It's not been ruled out, it's not been mentioned in the committee reports, but it's certainly, as we go forward with the communication strategy, in terms of what we will detail on the various bins and in literature to say what we're going to collect, we're still in the discussions and we want to finalise this coming up to the rollout is what types of plastics. So at the moment we accept plastic bottles of any kind, but there are other plastics that can be accepted and are suitable for recycling. So Tetra Paks can be included in that discussion. That's something the team can do, but it's not ruled out. It's just not put in the report at this present time.
Welcome back.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me come back in. I think the amount of questions I have highlights the fact that I have a keen interest in this, but I don't necessarily have all the knowledge. And as per last week, I was appointed as the Vice Chair of the new Waste Committee, and I think it's imperative that those members that are going to sit in that committee have appropriate and proper training so that we can, in fact, scrutinise and make sound recommendations back to whichever parent committee is going to have the financial decision making on that. One final point, you mentioned about the electric vehicles and the mileage that is covering. A note in the paper on page 40, the annual mileage for the food and glass collections is only 36,000 in comparison to 240,000. So I would hope that that is possibly looked at, because the mileage that those vehicles are covering is far less than the regular ones. But I would hope also that the officer looking at that is looking at all the current research, and I would hope that they have the specific training required for the future, because I think we need to make the right decisions here, but we need to have the facts and knowledge in order to make them. But thank you.
Just on that one on training, James, is that something that we can arrange after the recess?
Absolutely. I mean, I personally found the members' workshop that we did earlier in the year very useful in terms of imparting the information that we had and the engagement in that more informal manner. Quite happy for the waste subcommittee to be initially an opportunity to sit and discuss through all the sort of processes that we've been following and seek to answer any questions, and where we're not able to go back and find out. In a similar manner as Cttee will be aware from, Councillor Hagman will be aware from the Harbour Subcommittee, that we use that opportunity to train as well as, just take papers.
Okay, thank you. Jim McComb?
Thanks, Chair. At 3.2.7, it states the deposit return scheme is estimated to achieve collection rates of 95%. Are you satisfied that this is an accurate estimate?
James?
For the best information we've received from Zero Waste Scotland, Scottish Government, 95% is what they're saying will be the return rate. I guess they're basing this on experience in other countries that they've looked at for deposit return schemes at 20 pence for a single-use drinks container, which is principally what it is. It's an opportunity, and I think we discussed the last committee, for entrepreneurial young or entrepreneurial people to collect any waste that's left lying around. I mean, part of the reason for deposit return scheme is to reduce littering as well, so there's less of an incentive just to throw your juice bottle or can away. So I suspect there will be a high... I mean, in terms of what we're doing as a collection service, it may vary, it may be less, it may be more, but it's not going to change principally the method in which we do the collection service. If it sits at 80% or it sits at 95%, we still will have the same collection service.
If the collection rate is nowhere near 95%, the deposit return rate, surely this upsets our calculations of communal bring sites for glass collection.
James.
With the glass collection, the way we're looking at doing that is initially setting out. So our proposals for rolling out a curbside collection service are into the middle of next year. The deposit return scheme is not considered to be in place until the middle of 2021. So we will have to set out glass collection points to gather the glass pre the deposit return scheme being in place. So the capacity we will provide will be relative to what the code of practice says, which I think is 10 litres per household per week, and they have to be within a kilometre of these properties. So what will happen is we will put out, say, a 1280 litre bin, one of the big, the big trade bins at a small community. Now, initially, we will probably going to empty that every week or every 2 weeks or every month, depending on how full it gets, how much it's used. After the deposit return scheme we will see a drop-off in the amount of glass going into that. So the same facility will still be provided, but instead of going in on a weekly, fortnightly or monthly basis, we may be going in on a 3-monthly, 4-monthly, 6-monthly basis. So it will reduce our cost of collection, but we will still need to provide the same receptacle at a location. Our costs will be reduced because we're not going out to empty it as often. So what we find in the Wigton area is, you'll be aware that some of the communities are looking to have their glass recycling facilities removed because they're just not getting used, and that's understandable because they have a curbside collection for glass. So we will develop it like that, but what it will do is not change the volume that we'll provide. Principally, it will change the frequency of collection.
Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Chair. The problem I find with the existing bottle banks is not so much the fact they are not being used, but they're not being frequently emptied. And you finish up with collections of bottles scattered round the bottle bank site.
James.
That's not an acceptable service from this authority. So, I mean, if there's specific instances, we can talk about that offline. There is improvements in technology. We would look certainly to replace the big skip style facilities that we have in the Wigton area with bins that are liftable by RCVs, so we can continue with the same fleet. We would look not to mix colours of, we would look to mix colours of glass, because that means we don't need 3 bins per site. We can get away with 1 if it's a small number of people served. But also there is the technology out there that can be installed within the bin that uses like a mobile phone signal to advise when the bin has reached a level that you would want to then program in a visit to empty it. So we could look at those, they're clip-in devices, so they can be moved around if we're finding they're not required, or we're only emptying every 6 months or things like that. But because the service will be set up around collecting from community bring sites across the region, I think it'll be a new service. It'll be a refreshed service. So we would hope that the issues you're experiencing don't happen. But as I said, if there's specific instances, then speak to us and we will see what we can do.
David James.
Good morning. Obviously, opting for a bespoke system is quite complex, so we'll be reliant on people like Hagman and Hislop with their inquiring minds to drill down and save us from another multi-million-pound fiasco. If I was going to play any small part in improving the system, I'd need to understand 2 or 3 more things, well, probably 200 or 300 more things, but on page 29, STRANRAER, the ZWP, will that close? And then I want to ask, yes, this is the thing. What do we expect residual rubbish to be? I'm thinking about a town like Dalbeattie where food is going to be collected separately, bottles separately, then of course paper and card, metal and plastics, and there are 480 litres potential of general residual waste. What would we expect to be in that? And then the Eco-Deco plant seems to have to deal with that rubbish, and either it can or it can't. And if it can, what was the problem before? Why do we need to sort? And if it can't, what happens to the output from it that is then unsorted or untreated or unrecycled or whatever it does? Thank you.
James.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Councillor James, in terms of there's the STRANRAER Zero Waste Park, no, it's an integral part of the service that we'll deliver. So at the moment, the STRANRAER Zero Waste Park serves 4 purposes actually. It has a household waste recycling centre, so a public centre for depositing your waste, and a reuse facility which allows certain things that come into the waste stream to be reused, so washing machines, sofas, things like that that are good enough quality that can be repaired or maybe not even requiring repaired, and they can be checked over and then sold on. So that reuse facility is pretty critical in the waste hierarchy in terms of, reuse should be our first option. And we would look to have a similar facility at the Dumfries Zero Waste Park in due course. It also serves the purpose of being the location where the dry recyclers vehicles deposit their waste, and that's sorted and then shipped on for sale. So plastics, metals, glass is all brought to there from our collection service. And it offers a bulking facility for the residual waste collected in the west of the region. So the RCVs, which collect the black bag waste, deposit there. It's then loaded onto 40-ton wagons and driven back to Dumfries for tipping into the Eco-Deco facility. So that the purpose of the Zero Waste Park in STRANRAER will remain. In terms of what will be in the residual rubbish, the Eco-Deco facility currently processes and takes out certain waste streams that will reduce in volume because of the changes in curbside collection. So you're correct in saying that if you take out glass, if you take out food, you're going to change the makeup of the waste that goes into the Eco-Deco facility. But there will still be food in that because we're only collecting from postcode areas, the food collection service. So that's about 48% of the properties in the region. So there'll still be food in there. And inevitably, there still will be recyclers in there. And that's one of the encouragements from Scottish Government in terms of, if you read the Code of Practice, there's an encouragement very much to reduce the volume of residual waste capacity that is given to households. So the standard in the Code of Practice actually says if you have a full curbside collection service, then you only require, I think it's 160 litres per week. And we at the moment providing 120, and we're providing 50% more. It was in the previous committee report, or certainly was in the draft of this committee report previously. But because we're retaining the 240 litre bin for residual waste and collecting it every fortnight, we will have an excess of what the Code of Practice requires. If you can reduce the volume of residual waste capacity, then what you do is you force people that the only way they can get rid of their waste is actually to take out the recyclates and put it in the recycling bins. So we will still want to do that. The residual waste will still contain material that the Eco-Deco facility will process. It will still produce a fuel because there are lots of plastics that people will not be able to recycle or choose not to recycle, and that will change with how people engage with what they buy and what they dispose of. But the Eco-Deco facility will still serve a purpose going forward.
Okay, so you didn't want to go into the gory detail of what might be found in residual waste, but we think it's going to be much less than the 480 because the sortable rubbish is got. So are you expecting a lot of that to be like non-compliant? Is that built in that we expect that people haven't sorted as well as they should do, and that's why that capacity is there. And then the eco-deco then, all right, does it handle everything then? So its output is energy, but we are supposed to recycle first and foremost and not output in energy, and that was the problem, was it, that kicked this all off?
So the EcoDeco facility was built prior to the 2012 regulations. So the 2012 regulations required a curbside collection service. So our EcoDeco facility was principally built as landfill diversion. Okay, so what it did was it took all the black bag waste and it shreds it and it dries it. And in drying it, you reduce the volume by 30%. Now, if you're paying £100 a tonne for disposal at landfill, and you can reduce the volume of, in our case, about 55,000 tonnes by 30%, then you save sort of 12 to 14,000 tonnes of waste going to landfill because you've dried it. Now, at £100 a tonne, you can see that's pretty worth doing. We're also going to take material out, but that was before we were forced by Scottish Government to comply with the Code of Practice, to comply with legislation which said we were required to have a curbside collection service. So now that the contract, so we had an issue with the contract and the need to change in law. Now the contract's all finished and we are operating the facility. We're now able to roll out a curbside collection service. What we'll see is it will see a reduced volume going into the EcoDeco facility, but it will still see a volume of residual waste that will need to be treated in some way. So the way we're treating it, shredding it, drying it, and then processing it at the moment in the refinement section, so taking out metals and plastic, taking out metals, taking out glass, and resulting with a fuel as the main output from the facility, will still continue to happen. It will just be reduced volumes.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Chair. It says quite rightly at 3.4.3 that critical to the successful rollout will be effective stakeholder engagement. Just really seeking some assurances based on previous history. One of the affected changes was there may be changes to custom and practice where a number of bins are collected down a lane, whereas I think in the past we tried to introduce it when they had to bring them all up to the top of the lane. And again, with assisted pullouts, there may be some changes there. And it's really just to seek assurances that there will be direct contact with anyone that may be affected by the changes to the process.
James.
Absolutely. I mean, in terms of assisted pullouts, there is no proposed changes to the assisted pullout service, so that will remain available for anybody that requires it. The only thing we've done with assisted pullouts is rationalise it a little bit, where we're saying, rather than just if you ask for it, you get every part of the service. We're saying, look, if you can't take the bin out, from the back of your property, but if you're able to take it back empty from curbside, so that reduces the input from our staff if people are able to manage it. So we rationalise that. We're going to check it each year. End of road policy. That's something that we are looking at as a service, because particularly if we're going to bring in a new fleet, we want to make sure that we don't have issues with them going up roads that are unsuitable. But that's something that was a policy that was agreed a number of years ago. We're looking at that as part of the route planning, and any changes we make in that will come back and we will engage with the communities or the properties that we directly affected.
Okay, I've got a few members who wish to talk about this. I've got John Young, Ros, Stephen Thompson, Willie Scobie, and then Katie again.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously delighted that Castle Douglas area is going to be used to test a new electric recycling vehicle. Look forward to that 5-year lease, and hopefully that will confirm that that's the future. Page 39, James, there's costs of wheelie bins, 150,000 wheelie bins, about £19 each. Quite a lot of communities in Castle Douglas area, blocks of flats. There's no costings for recycling bins. I would imagine they'll have 3 different bins serving the whole block of flats. And that will occur quite frequently without the region that, even in King Street, Castle Douglas, people aren't going to really manage 3 bins when they live upstairs with no back garden. So will there be facilities to share these large aluminium bins? I presume they'll have 3 located nearby.
Hello.
We are aware that there's 7,400 flatted properties across Dumfries and Galloway, and we estimate probably about 5,000 of those are currently using a wheel bin for their waste. The intention is that we will write to all of these properties to identify what they can actually cope with, because some might be able to cope with additional bins and some won't. And as an alternative, we're looking to provide plastic sacks for the recycling so they can participate.
So there'll be no shared bins for flatted areas, they'll just be given different coloured plastic sacks?
Again, we're in consultation with DGHP, LOREBURN and Urban Housing Association, so we're having meetings with them to see what different properties can accommodate, because one size doesn't fit all. Okay.
Okay, Rose.
Thank you very much. I'm on page 28, 3.2.6. I think what we're talking generally here is a culture change, and I think we have educated people to get into the habit of recycling. And I think particularly with the food recycling and across the region, obviously some smaller areas are going to miss out on the food cycling facility. And some of the questions I've been approached about, and I'm sure other councillors have, is would there be a possibility now they feel like they're committing a sin putting food into bins now? It's a change back, if you like. Is there a possibility of a facility centrally in some of these larger areas that people could take their food waste to?
James.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Surtees. The issue of food waste is an unfortunate situation that we want to pull back to the code, and that will impact upon the rural properties of the Wigton area. But I mean, the costs are clear to see, and I think environmentally it's advantageous not to collect it over the advantage we get from the small volumes we collect. The trouble with food waste is that we have a requirement to move it on. We can only store it for 2 to 3 days before it has to be moved for processing. So it's not a facility we could provide, for example, at a zero waste park where you could come to Stranraer and then dropping off your sofa, you could drop off a week's worth of food waste, because we would need to be emptying that every couple of days. Now, if we've got it in Stranraer, the volumes we're collecting at the moment curbside are small. I think if we said to people, you can bring it, but you have to bring it to Stranraer, we're probably going to get less. What would be better would be the provision of composting facilities that are suitable for certain types of food waste, not cooked food, but vegetable peelings and things like that can be composted. And we have subsidised composting bins in the past, and it's something that we haven't taken to any great detail, but it's something that we as an authority can look at as part of the solution. So if you are losing a service, or if you're not going to get a food collection service, can we subsidise a compost bin? There are other facilities, Wormeries, which you're getting out of my skill set here, but I believe there are ways of dealing with more food waste at a local level. So if people wish to do that, that would be sort of a recycling at the home. So I think that we can look to that as an alternative and see what availability there is and what take up there would be for that kind of facilities.
Anaerobic digester comes to mind in some areas. Stephen Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, a couple of questions. I suppose one is, while I think on page 33 it mentions the payment of £6 million, which is helpful in terms of the cost of the termination, because I don't know if we'd banked on that before, but it does then over the page talk about the Waste Review Reserve, as it's now called, which retains a 1.645 million. I'm just sort of wondering, I take it there'll be detail about how that could be tapped into if required, and how that's ring-fenced towards sort of future delivery of the implementation of the strategy. So maybe a wee question about that. Similarly, on the back of Councillor Hislop's initial question, clearly this is an enabling report, which is to sort of set the direction, and then the details will be coming back to Policy and Resources or its successor in terms of like more detailed costs, etc. So this is sort of setting the direction, and then we'll get those details. But the Waste Subcommittee or the Waste Committee, I take it there'll be details coming back to that, so we can get a much more closer look at exactly how we're arriving at some of the figures that we're looking at today, in terms of when we start to monitor operational delivery or implementation, we'll actually get a sense of, well, we can see that that's a cost pressure, or this is a potential saving, or, you know, as it starts to unfold. So, because the figures as we're getting presented with, I think we probably are all hoping that there'll be more efficiencies to come from that, given the sort of relative difference between what we were spending and what we're likely to spend, although there'll be obviously benefits as well. And just a final point, in terms of users and their constituents, will there be a kind of sort of ready reckoner or easy sort of list of exactly what, for example, plastics are recyclable? So obviously PET, etc., is sort of one that would be more readily recycled, as it were. But for most sort of household users, whenever they go to a recycling centre, there might be an infographic or something like that that just says yes, 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 no, 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 or what to do with each piece of plastic, because it's quite a complex consumer environment where you don't know half the time what you can recycle, what you can't. So maybe that's part of the stakeholder engagement and information sessions. So, but that would probably be helpful. Thank you.
Just on your final point, actually, the group that we've been meeting with Friends of the Earth and the Eco Warriors and all that, that was one of the suggestions that they actually made to go to household waste recycling centres, and that was taken on board by, you know, Janice. James, for the response.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Councillor Thompson, in terms of the, so just looking at your questions, the Waste Review Reserve, my understanding from discussions with the Head of Finance is that once we presented full costings for the service, including the delivery of the infrastructure at the Zero Waste Park and the 2 transfer stations, that point and the funding availability from Scottish Government, that will be part of the mix in terms of, you know, how that money is used. So it's not being given to me to go out and buy new vehicles today or anything like that. In terms of the purpose of the Waste Subcommittee, you probably know more than I do about what's going to happen with it. I'm there to just take your direction as to how you know members want the committee run, and the level of detail and engagement we have with that. I'm happy with anything in that respect. The more you understand the process, the better it is for us, in my view. In terms of what can be recycled, the Chair is completely correct. We have been discussing with Friends of the Earth, the Dumfries area, been very helpful in that regard. We look at, so there's a number on the bottom of on the recycling types. 1, 2 and 5 are the types that recycle. The challenge is it's the difference between telling people, you know, getting as much recycler in there and making it easy for people to understand, so they don't just throw up their hands in despair and go, I don't understand it, and not recycle anything. So we've always kind of pushed it on if it's a drinks bottle, if it's a plastic bottle, you know, holding shampoo or washing liquid or things like that, these are recyclable. But we are able to take other types. The Code of Practice says, you know, bottles and such like, and where possible, other types of plastic. So you're right, it does need to be given some thought. And as is the nature of the waste industry, it will change because other plastics will become more suitable for recycling as processes change. So, yeah, very much so. We would intend making it as simple as possible for people to recycle while trying to bring in as much recycle as possible.
Okay, Willie?
Chair, just to pick up on what Sean was saying in 3.4.3 on page 34, it's to the part where our council policy is to be an inclusive council, and Sean referred to the bin down the lane, and James, you come back with the end of road policy. And if we are going to be an inclusive council and more to the hinterlands, the more rural areas, are we going to look at this where, you know, it would be possible to send a fleet, a lorry, a suitable sized lorry, to areas where we have not in the past? And I see a shaking of the head there. In that respect, then I think if we are going to honour that to be an inclusive council, then we've got to look at it. And I'll maybe pick up the specifics with you, James, at a different offline as you talk about. So it's really that, whether we're going to look at the policy of end of road and deliver services that is inclusive. And to the other point where, you know, the cultural change that we got people to recognise that recycling the food waste and how Ross said the smaller areas are going to lose out because that's how we've been operating for a number of years now. And it's that to the 2 to 3 days to move it on in terms of food waste. We're now going to be asking people in areas, in Wigton area, that used to get or is in the habit of getting food waste, and that will no longer be there, yet it'll still be a fortnightly lift. They'll be expected to put it in their bins. And what effect that's going to have with food lying in a bin for a possible 2 weeks. And the other thing, and Ross touched on it, and it's in 3.2.17, I've raised this, and Archie just referred to it, and it's to the anaerobic digestive system, the plant, and whether you've had any further dialogue or discussion with the possibility of one in Stranraer.
James.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Scobie, we can certainly have a discussion offline about specific end of road collection. It would be our intention in due course to come back to this, or the successor committee, and probably through the waste subcommittee in terms of the end of road approach. It's always going to be a balance between cost of service delivery and an inconvenience stroke convenience for our customers, and that will be a committee decision on a strategic basis, I suspect, as all committee decisions are. In terms of food waste, line and wheelie bins for 2 weeks for areas that don't have a food waste collection service, that is correct, and clearly that's happening in about 4/5 of the population in the Stranraer and Wigton area, because only 1/5 of the population recycle food waste, so they only get a fortnightly collection. It's pretty standard across the country to go to residual waste collections on a fortnightly basis, and not everywhere in the country has a food waste collection. So beyond 2 weeks may become more of a problem, but we are presently proposing a 2-week residual waste collection. The anaerobic digestion option in Stranraer, absolutely in support of that as an authority. I'm not sure it falls specifically into my remit, but we have been in discussions with David Telfer, I think was the name you gave to me before. He's looking for availability, but it wouldn't survive solely on food waste from this authority. He would need to have that, and principally his source of material, the source of material would be an agricultural source. So we could use that as opposed to having to transport it further afield. We're very happy to support that, but it's a different kind of process.
We come back, Willie?
Please, Chair, and take the point that James raised that it may not be his remit. Could we find out whose remit it is, and maybe that it be reported to an early committee, because it was spoken of, they were in discussion, and indeed those were in-depth discussion to land being identified. So, and James is correct, it wouldn't be entirely waste. Waste would only be a supplement. It would be agricultural waste in growing farmers to grow the material or to keep the anaerobic digestive system going. But I think we need that discussion, because I think you referred to one of the meetings, James, you're taking this waste away to somewhere in Yorkshire. Now, there's a greater savings, I would imagine, somewhere along the line, if it was localised, at least in Dumfries and Galloway.
Okay, so we'll take that offline and see what we can get into the early reports into waste subcommittee and that, Willie, okay? Kate, I'm going to ask a first-time speaker and first before yourself, so Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got two questions, really. I've got page 31, 3.2.27, about the reuse facility. I was wondering if there's been any interest shown from anybody to operate that, how that was going to happen. Is it potentially going to be a community asset transfer to a third party? How do we see that operating? And if it doesn't go ahead, what kind of effect would it have on the strategy? And the next question is actually when we get to the key milestones. I always think one of the most important milestones in projects such as these is the point where we're going to be receiving reports back as to the success of it. I presume that will be coming back to the new waste committee, but I would feel more encouraged if there was a mention that whether it be 6 months or whether it's a quarterly review in the initial first year of it being fully implemented, to make sure that not only that the costs are under control, because as Ivor highlighted, there is a bit of dubiety about where the costs are going to end up with this. The other thing is, depending on the success of the engagement with stakeholders, what the buy-in is, as Councillor Young mentioned, or I think it was maybe Councillor McComb actually, about the percentage of glass being recycled or whatever. So I would kind of like to see a report back being one of the milestones.
James?
Yeah, Chair, thank you. In respect to the reuse facility, so the facility in Stranraer is run by Stranraer Furniture Project. It is a charitable organisation and successful, and they've been recently in contact about wanting to do further development at the Zero Waste Park in Stranraer to offer more opportunities for the sale of recycled products. So we are due to have a meeting with them shortly in that regard. We have interest from a community group in Dumfries with regards to operating the Dumfries reuse facility, and we are due to meet them shortly, and we can provide further details offline on how that goes, but we haven't had that meeting yet. But they've been involved in over a number of years and have met colleagues in the past. So there is quite a lot of interest in doing that. I suspect that there will continue to be, but you know, if we don't have anybody taking on that role in terms of recycling, then or reuse, then the waste will be processed as it currently is through bulky uplifts and disposal through routes away from the MBT or through the MBT itself, the Eco-Deco facility. In terms of key milestones, I mean, I think there's part of the reason why I haven't yet shown in the sort of milestones document on committee reports is that I was kind of in the situation that I didn't know when the committees were occurring. I think you'll probably find that you're going to get bored of me because I don't say I enjoy coming to committee, but I consider it important to come to committee. So I would expect waste reports to be coming to either the subcommittee was a new one on me quite recently, but I would intend that the members are kept informed of all waste issues going forward, and as my director directs me and my head of service, we will keep you members informed, because if we don't, then how are you supposed to know what the decisions being made? So I would expect it to be unusual that you won't get some form of update on the waste, particularly over the next 6 months to a year to 2 years, given all the changes that we're proposing. So hopefully that allays your concerns that we're going to disappear for 2 years.
Malcolm?
It's just in my experience, I find with projects, the review stage is one of the key stages with every sort of project like that.
Okay, we'll make sure that those are in the future reports. Just with regards, didn't like coming to committee. I know some councillors that they like coming to committee as well, by the way. Katie?
Thank you, Chair, for letting me come back in. I do welcome the reuse sites, and would hope in future we can perhaps roll them out to all our sites across the region, because I think we should be looking to reuse before we look at recycling. That's just economics, as far as I'm aware. I'm looking at the timeline and the concerns raised by Councillor Hislop, and it's a suggestion I'd like to make for the recommendations, because on recommendations 2.2, we're asked to note the proposals and agree to refer consideration to the required funding Policy and Resources Committee or successor, which we've established already. But further down on 2.4, we're agreeing to the timeline and key milestones. Now, for those of you who know me on committee, I do like a timeline, and I like timetables, of which we have got on page 36. However, on the investment decisions, the second last column, it states that EEI Committee will approve for investment recommendations, both capital and revenue. It has today's date, and it says that all this information is in here. If you look at the line below, it actually states in the final column that further decision on investment should be determined by Policy and Resources Committee. My suggestion would be that we amend that table, that the last column, the second up from the bottom, is the same as the very bottom one, because actually that table doesn't reflect what's in the recommendations. And my final point that I would just like to ask is I really welcome the proposed ward events. We had the ward event in my own ward, which I was lucky enough to be able to be hosting, and I appreciate that both Janice and James came along, and it was a really well received event. We also agreed last week at full council that we look at transforming our council, and we also agreed that there would be a recycling and litter public-facing event that would take place on the 23rd of September. So my question is, how does that event, in terms of transformation within the council, sit and slot in to this timetable? Because, you know, we don't want to be working in silos. We should be all working together and finding a solution for this. So, yes, if I could just ask those. Thank you.
James?
With respect to the reuse sites across the region, as space permits on our household waste recycling centres, we would look to provide facilities that would allow people to deposit materials that they felt were suitable for reuse, so that they could then be brought into the Dumfries or STRANRAER zero waste parks. But it is limited. But more space should become available if we're no longer collecting metals and plastics because we have a curbside collection of these, or paper. So the paper card facilities could maybe be reduced in size, so there may be capacity for reuse skips, walk-in skips for materials that people may consider would be suitable like that. In terms of the changes to the report and reflecting that, I'm happy to take your suggestion in that regard. With the ward events, community conversations, I've spoken to, or I've contacted all the ward officers with regards to establishing dates and venues, suitable dates and venues for that. I will pick up with them with regards to, I didn't realise a date had been picked for that event, but I had spoken to Stephen about it before he went on leave, that he'd been having that conversation. So I'll pick up on that again. But yeah, we don't want to confuse the situation by having different messages going out there. But I'm quite sure we can incorporate that and potentially take some of the information that comes out of that and include it at all 12 of our board events as well. Might be another option to share that. So when I know a little bit more about that littering event, I'll discuss.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Chair. Very brief point, follow-up to Councillor Scobie. Do we maintain a register of anaerobic digesters currently operating in Dumfries and Galloway?
James?
I certainly don't. It may be something that sits under environmental health, so somebody out with this committee may be able to answer that question, but I can take that away offline and ask colleagues, unless anybody else in the room has an answer for that.
Jim?
My point is, if there are digesters operating locally, that provides an opportunity to get rid of the food waste.
Yeah, my suspicions are that there isn't somebody suitable to take it, and the reason I would say that is that we have a contract with a local waste collection disposal firm for our food waste, and then they bulk it and take it on for disposal. I suspect that they have gone to the most economically advantageous disposal point if they're trying to run a successful business, and therefore North Yorkshire is their preferred location. So I suspect there isn't anything suitable within the region. That doesn't mean there won't be in the future.
However, I mean, we have signed the climate emergency change thing, and I think, James, it may be an action to take away for this, to have a look and see if there is potentially an opportunity. I mean, you're looking at this as part of our contract with that food waste company, so therefore we can maybe have a look at that as part of an action. Okay, members, go to the recommendations. Members are asked to agree 2.1, agree 2.2 with the change in the table that Katie mentioned at on page 36, was it? 36. 2.3, we've got to note that. 2.4 we've asked to agree that, and 2.5 to agree that as well. I'd just like to add another recommendation, 2.6, that any information from today's meeting will go forward to the waste sub as part of a report going forward. Agreed? Thank you. Now we move on to item number 6. The Economy, Environment, Infrastructure Revenue Budget OUTTURN Report 2018-19 report by Director, Communities Director, Economy Resources. This report provides members with an overview of the performance against budget of Economy, Environment, Infrastructure for the year ended 31st of March 2019 and the key issues that have contributed to that performance. There is obviously the issue of the trunk roads contract, which we will come to in the next report. So we're very much aware of that, and we will discuss that under that particular report. Have you got anything to add, Caroline? Members? Ivor?
Chair, within the last report, I think it was 3.3.6, it said that we didn't know if the Scottish Government was going to continue to fund the money that it put in for the PFI contract. Now, my understanding that finished in September. So, have they funded from September on? If not, where is that roughly 1.6 million, because it's 3.2 million per annum, or thereabouts, where's that 1.6 million highlighted within the books? Or is it the Waste Review Reserve, which totals 1.645 million, or is that actually, rather than the Waste Review Reserve, a bad debt provision?
Caroline?
Through you, Chair. The funding, the £3.2 million zero waste funding has been agreed. It was agreed for 18-19, so we had that. For 19-20, they agreed to pay it, so we've got it for 19-20. The reduction would be from 2021 financial year, so 1st of April 20, if the discussions don't go satisfactorily and we get that back. The 1.4 million, which is the level playing field and insurance, which we got for 18-19, so there was no problem with that. That reduction is included in the 19-20 accounts, but has been taken account of.
Okay. Any other members? Okay, can we go through the recommendations? And we're asked to note 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3. Thank you very much. We'll then go on to item number 7, which is Trunk Road Maintenance Management Contract OUTTURN Report by Director of Communities. The purpose of this report is to provide members with an overview of the financial deficit on this contract report for 2018-19. The report also outlines the scope of an investigation to be undertaken on the cause of the losses reported in the 4th generation Trunk Road Maintenance Management Contract. I have this morning been given a letter from the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee to add additional points to the scope of the investigation, although I do believe they're already in it, but I'm quite happy to take these 4 points. And these 4 points are: number 1, were the financial and risk management controls fit for purpose? Number 2, if they were fit for purpose but failed, what were the reasons for the failure? Number 3, if they were not fit for purpose, how can the financial controls and risk management be improved to ensure they operate effectively in the future? And 4, how can risk management arrangements be improved to give greater transparency and assurance to members of the Council? So looking at the scope of the investigation, I'm happy to put them in, and discussing this with Derek, he's also happy to put those in, the scope of the investigation. Derek, have you got anything to add to the report?
Nothing to add, Chairman, thank you.
Members? Malcolm?
Thank you, Chair. This figure appearing out of the blue obviously came as a bit of a shock to all of us here. I was a bit surprised that it was accrued income. So I presume if it's accrued income, it's this was not invoiced, but it was an accrual put in for expectation of that income being invoiced at some point. The next thing is, did it all come in one great big lump, or has it been a carry forward for a few years? Have we perhaps been £500,000 short for 6 years on the trot? I'd just like a wee bit of clarity about that.
Before you answer, I mean, I think obviously that's in the scope of the investigation, and I don't want to sort of preempt any answers coming back because the investigation itself may bring that forward.
Right, well, then we'll move on to the investigation. It says that the investigation's going to be carried out by a chief officer. Now, there's going to be a bit of a perception here, I think, in the broader public that what we've got here is we've got the fox checking the security of the chicken coop. And when we were out on at the last meeting at Policy and Resources, it was a formal investigation. Now, when we select this chief officer to carry this thing out, are we going to be sure that the officer in question has all the skills and experience necessary to carry out an audit of this?
Yeah, and I think also at the same meeting, I think it was Jane, who is the vice chair of scrutiny, said that it should be, you know, where possible, an internal investigation. I actually see it as a two-stage issue. We need to get our due process done internally first, and then whatever comes from that investigation will come back to whatever future committee for any other investigation. But Derek, do you want to?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I think, put simply, the report does acknowledge that there's a serious issue here. It's not been taken lightly in any shape or form. The Chief Officer will be clearly reporting to myself, and I would simply reaffirm in this chamber today that you can be assured of the detail and the comprehensiveness of that investigation, and it will leave no stone unturned, and I can assure you will involve the necessary expertise, and therefore we will call on that expertise as appropriate within my delegation. So I would hope that would reassure both the member raising it and the committee that we do have the appropriate skills and expertise, both internally and to hand as required, and these will be fully utilised.
Thank you very much for that, Derek. That is reassuring, but the point I was really making, as much as anything else, was about the perception in the broader community.
Okay, there's maybe one other that I would like to maybe consider as the scope of investigation, is to establish exactly how many disputes there was from over the period of the contract from beginning to end, and how they or were they actually resolved. Yeah. Katie, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's just really to touch on the point there that was made about the Chief Officer having access to staff records and expertise, and it's just to confirm, will there be an option for legal and contractual expertise to be tapped into there, because, you know, not everybody has all skills in everything, so it's just to confirm that legal and contractual expertise will be sought.
Thank you, Chair. And I come back to Councillor Johnson's point, fully agree about the perception issue, and it's something that I quite clearly understand and acknowledge and agree as a concern. Councillor Hagman, what I would emphasise in this report at paragraph 373, this is a serious issue for the senior leadership team of this council, and therefore we will access all resources, financial, legal and procurement, to ensure we have the expertise to hand, and therefore you can be reassured that will be the case.
Ivor?
Chair, it's maybe digging into the investigation, but just for my own information, at 3.5 within the report, the value is 2.899 million, 2.615 million income accrued that is not recoverable. Was that in year 1819? Because underneath it says 2.84 costs incurred in 1819. It's just...
Caroline?
The £2.6 million income accrued was actually at the end of the financial year 17-18. It should have therefore arrived in 18-19 and didn't.
You want to come back, Ivor?
So, is it actually 2.6? So it'll be 3.1 million because we actually had a £538,000 write-off in June last year. And I'll read you out what it said. Dispute over method of charging. Following legal advice, it was concluded that we had little prospect of success in seeking legal action to recover balance. Is that an additional 538,000 on, now I'll just say who it's from, Scotland Transfer? Scotland Transfer, Oatlands House. Is it is this additional 538? So we've got away with writing off 500 last year, and this year we've got another 2.5 to hide.
My understanding of the investigation will be the whole contract will be investigated. I'm going to pass over to Caroline.
You're right that the 500,000 related to a contractual issue with regard to the beginning of the contract. That was written off. This is additional to that 500,000.
So, Chair, in that 1 year, we had £3 million worth. Officers knew there was £3 million worth, and it came from the Director of Finance. This is one of his reports, the Financial Code write-offs. We've got officers sitting at the top table who've known about this, and this is the first that we are getting the 2.6 million. I have concerns along the lines that the fox and the chicken coop here.
Your concerns are noted, but again, this is about the investigation going forward. Sean?
Yeah, just on Ivor's point there, can I just confirm that the 500,000 odd that was written off last year will be subject to this investigation as well?
Yes, all of it will be subject to the investigation.
Willie, you want to come in?
Yeah, please, Chair, and it does refer to a chief officer. And in my estimation, we've got 4 chief officers, or at least at director level and the chief executive. Is that the level we are talking about? Because, or what level are we going down to in terms of who will do the investigation? Because Derek referred to senior management. What level of competence are we going to get in terms of who's going to conduct this investigation? What level are we going to?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Scobie. The Council has 14 chief officers. It would be one of these chief officers, and it would be expected to be at the level of head of service, which clearly requires to have the appropriate skills and experience to carry out a serious investigation, notwithstanding my previous reassurance about access to the appropriate expertise and advice.
David?
Thank you, Chair. 3.6, Policy and Resources Committee on 13th of June considered the Council's Corporate Revenue Outturn Report 2018-19. Prior to considering this report, advised discussions with senior officers, an investigation would be conducted. So it was not the Policy and Resources Committee that decided to have this investigation, because I was wondering whether there were options to... Sorry.
Policy and Resources did decide to have this investigation.
Okay, right. Thank you. And therefore, did they have an option as to what type of investigation this would be, for example, internally led or externally led?
The decision was made to came back here for the report to look at this and the subject of Councillor Jane Maitland was that if it needed to be internal, it'd be internal, but where required external would be sought for advice. So yes, that was. You could actually listen to the actual Policy and Resources Committee meeting that day.
Probably more than Jane Maitland on that committee. I've never been on it myself, but so it decided itself that this would be internally led. Yes or no?
The decision will be done today.
We're deciding if it will be internally led or not today.
If you look at the recommendations, we're looking at the investigation is conducted fully, ascertain the cause of the report of financial loss and agree the draft scope of the investigation to be progressed. The draft scope of the investigation is 3.7.1 plus the additional ones from scrutiny, audit risk and scrutiny, and the additional ones that I've said before. So we've got to get the report, we've got to get the investigation done. It's probably going to be a 2-stage investigation because the report will have to come back to an appropriate committee, and decision will have to be made after that.
Would it be an option then that we agreed that it would be externally led as opposed to internally led?
I mean, you can make a motion if you wish at the end of the day, but the recommendations will be as they are at the end of this report.
Yes, so I would like to do that this is externally led rather than internally led. That's my motion.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? No. Okay, so that will fall. I'll take it you will want your dissent recorded. Okay, thank you. Okay, members will go to the recommendations then. We're asked to note 2.1, note 2.2, and agree 2.3 with the additional scope, which I believe Derek has got. Do you want this copy of the... Thank you. Now we move on to agenda item 8. Members, this report is to update members on the building service employees who transferred from the Council to LOREBURN Housing Association at midnight on the 31st of March 2019 under the Transfer of Undertakings Protection of Employment Regulations 2006 as amended, which is TUPE, following termination of the reactive repairs contract by LOREBURN Housing Association on 10th of August 2018 and coming into effect at 1 minute past midnight on the 1st of April 2019. This report provides employee and financial information relating to the organised grouping of employees who transferred to LOREBURN Housing Association, the associated income and the cost transformation. The Head of People and Transformation will take any questions on the report. Steve, you got anything to add to it?
Nothing to add, Chair. Thank you.
Paul, got anything to add?
Nothing to add, Chair.
Stephen and then Ivor.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. It was just, obviously there's a table there giving a breakdown of the employment group on page 66, which details the 19 number of employees who transferred. But, I mean, obviously the report is sort of predicated on there was, I suppose, a saving or an efficiency as a result of this, which isn't being met, so because not everybody initially perceived as being associated as sort of TUPE transferred. So it was really just to get an understanding. We've got a lot of detail about the people who aren't with us. Do we have any detail about the people who remain with us and what's going to happen to them, etc.? Because it does note that no management capacity transferred because of the way the operation was structured. And what is the, just to clarify again, what is the funding pressure that remains as a result of only 19 transferring?
Paul?
Chair, thank you. Not aware that there was a defined level of saving identified as a result of that. However, clearly the numbers have differed between the original report, which indicated 26 people when in practice 19 transferred. That was as a result, and it's quite normal for that to happen. Staff engaged who would normally transfer have got different jobs, and also they have applied for different jobs within the council, and I think that's made up of the 7 people who didn't actually transfer at the end of the day. How we would deal with that, as you know, the whole council is in transformation, and there's some transition issues there, and obviously we would deal with any pressures and movement of staff through DG Transform primarily.
Caroline, you anything to add to that?
Chair, just to add that it is being investigated in detail as to the service going forward. There is unused capacity within the staff group that are remaining, which, if fully utilised, should reduce the deficit that on paper exists from the transfer to a minimal amount.
Right.
Yeah, so it was just really it was really just to get a sense or flavour of what that amount actually is, because it quantifies the 543,993 in the table, and then it alludes to a funding pressure in 3.15 on page 67, but it would be helpful to know what the funding pressure is.
Have you got an idea?
The current level of investigation would indicate that it is between £175,000 and £200,000 funding pressure. But as I say, that is accommodated largely by unused capacity. So it shouldn't be as nearly as big as that in once the full programme is sorted out.
Steve, you add to it?
Chair, yes, thank you. Really, it's just to reassure members that issue is being looked at in the round as part of the creation of the new property and facilities management structure. So we're fundamentally changing the way in which we utilise our internal workforce. So the old model, where we had the building services set up, is being replaced by the new property and facilities management model, which was agreed as part of the transformation process. So that capacity that Caroline is referring to, we are looking at how to embed that into our in-house repairs team as part of that new structure.
Ivor?
Chair, I was just wondering, with regard to the capacity within management, are any of them able to get the tools out and go and do some of the work, and then that would cover the skills gap? You know, they could, don't hear them sitting at the desk if they can, you know, even if using a brush. I was seeing a young lad yesterday out sweeping the street and making a really good job at it. So if they're sitting doing nothing, they could always do that.
Paul?
There's no suggestion that they're actually doing nothing. As outlined in the report, there's several other contracts which also require management capacity. We'll be looking at that in the round as Steve has indicated, through the move over to the property and facilities management model. And we will obviously transfer people out of that if in fact that capacity can be met from other means.
Yeah. Jim?
Throwaway line, Chair only, page 68316. The new arrangement will allow us to move forwards to a right first time repairs service where staff are empowered to take ownership of their own decision making. I thought that had been intrinsic in everything. We do get things right first time, and it's a sad state of affairs we need to put it in writing.
Throwaway line taken on board. Okay, we've got the recommendations. Members were asked to note 2.1 and 2.2. Okay. We'll then move on to the agenda item number 9, which is the Infrastructure Capital Programme and Street Lighting Spend to Save Projects OUTTURN Report and Infrastructure Capital Programme for 2019-20. The report is by Head of Roads and Infrastructure. This report provides members with a financial progress summary for the projects and programmes contained within the 2018-19 capital programmes of the infrastructure asset classes, including the Street Lighting Spend to Save programme. The report also details amendments to the 2019-20 OUTTURN position and presents a report and representation received in relation to the Dumfries and Galloway Royal Infirmary Junction improvements. And the team leader infrastructure assets will take any questions unless you've got anything to add, Steve.
No, nothing to add, Chair, thank you.
James, anything to add?
Yes, although I'll defer this report to my colleague Aileen, and I think she's going to then defer it to Tony for something to add at the start of this report, if that's okay.
Okay, do you want to go ahead?
So yes, I'll defer to Tony at this point, thank you.
Tony?
Okay, thanks, Chair. It was just a couple of updates. Item 350 was the report of the representations. Just to let you know that I've had 5 responses back from the 7 ward members, all in agreement to the recommendations. One of the members was on holiday and one was no response. And with regards to 351, it was the Sustrans Places for Everyone funding. We were due to get a notification of our award on the 24th of June, but this has now been deferred and we're expecting a decision sometime this week.
Cheers to come in now?
Nothing else, thank you, Chair.
Members? Katie?
Thank you, Chair. And just before I go into my question, I just want to thank officers for accelerating the lights at Darlaston. I'm aware that this is an issue that the community have been asking for a long time, and we've actually managed to get that put into this year's programme. So just to thank the officers for the work on that. I've got a couple of questions in terms of the appendix that we have in front of us. Appendix 3 states that it is the 2019-20 capital programme. Now, I'm looking through that and there's no mention of our core path network. that whole section is just not here, as is structures. Now, we're currently having the bridge rebuilt in Newton Stewart now in this year, but yet there's no mention of that within the report, and I'm just wondering why both those headings don't appear to be in there. A subsequent question I have is in terms of actors' travel. I'm aware, having made our declaration on climate emergency last week, we need to encourage people out of their cars and to be as active as possible. Now, clearly the budget for this year is tied up, but I would actually put a request in that for future years we look at encouraging everybody to be more. This was highlighted to me in so far that at the Douglas Stewart High School, over 600 pupils, not one of them cycles to school. There's not facilities for people, secure facilities to store bikes, and certainly there's new bike facilities popping up throughout our major cities where we actually have secured lockers for bikes, and whether this is in the future something we can look at. So that was just an added too. But my question is more so, where's the core path budget and where's the structure budget in the appendix before us?
Okay, Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Firstly, with regard to the structures, the programme for 1920 is on page 118 of Appendix 3. So sorry if there's been a confusion there at all. Is that okay? Yes.
Yes, but the bridge in Newton Stewart doesn't appear to be on there, which I'm confused by because we're in this year, we're currently paying for it and it's not on there at all. So
of course.
That was my query.
That's actually coming under the flood risk management programme, and has been sort of subject to, although there is capital investment, it's subject to a different sort of heading within the flood risk management work that has been undertaken as part of the whole Newton Stewart flood defences programme.
Sorry, it's not mentioned either though in the flood risk management on page 124. It's just missing.
Yeah, no, it's actually taken as part of the flood risk management work, and it's been reported separately to the committee. I'm sorry about the confusion that would have caused there.
Can I just pick up on that, Chair? The Newton Stewart scheme, the Langham scheme and the White Sands project are priority projects, so we're not in the infrastructure asset class capital programme. So they're reported separately and we get separate, you receive separate reports on that.
And the core path network?
Of course, sorry. And with regards to the core path, we're actually still awaiting some final clarification as to the specific management of the core path network with regard to the restructure and what happened there with the economic development side of that, if I could defer.
Steve.
I'm just struggling, Chair, because the core path network is actually mentioned in Appendix 1 with a figure, but yet we don't have the actual details. So if we're going to defer it, let's defer it across the board. Let's not have it mentioned in one aspect of the report and not in the second, in terms of continuity.
Steve.
Yes, the intention, Chair, is to transfer that core paths budget will now feature as part of the economic development asset class reporting, and we'll be bringing a detailed report to that on that to the next available committee, probably in September.
Okay, let's go to the recommendations. We're asked to note 2.1, note 2.2, note 2.3, agree 2.4, note 2.5, agree 2.6, and agree 2.7. Thank you. We'll then move on to item number 10, which is Economic Development Asset Class Capital Programme, the OUTTURN report by the Head of Economy and Development. This purpose is to provide details of the financial outturn of the Economic Development Asset Class Capital Programme for 2018. The Environmental Manager and Team Leader Strategic Projects will take any questions on the report unless you've got anything to add, Steve.
Nothing to add, Chair, thanks.
Anything to add, Melissa, Simon? Members of questions? Jim?
Just one, Chair, and it's up on this to all the projects there where it shows the slippage on the right-hand column. Given that the projects have been completed as far as they can be in each of the aspects there, is that the remaining available budget that can still be utilised to complete Because there are other opportunities, especially with the Gateway project.
Melissa?
The Gateway project isn't complete yet, Chair. We're nearing completion with it. So once we have completed the project, we will update the remaining budget on that, and as was agreed at the previous meeting, that would be reallocated into other projects in Upper Nithsdale.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, members, we'll go to the recommendation. We're asked to note 2.1 and agree 2.2. Okay, moving on to item number 11, which is Reshaping STRANRAER and the West Progress Report. This report provides a progress update on key projects within the Council Strategic Outline Programme for Reshaping STRANRAER and the West of the region. The Environmental Manager and Team Leader Strategic Project will take any questions on the report unless you've got anything to add to it. Steve?
Nothing to add, Chair. Thanks.
Simon?
Nothing to add, Chair.
Members? Will?
Yeah, Chair, a number of questions and points to make, and we did have, and both Simon and Melissa were at the meeting last night of the Community Council, and I think the important issue that came out of the meeting last night was that we need to be communicating better and letting the people know, the public, and while in 3.24 it refers to, and I'm pleased to note that we've now got the website up and running. We've got to use whatever means we've got at our disposal, and that would be part of the media.
Well, can I ask you maybe come a bit closer to your microphone?
You want me to shout, Chair? No, and it's really just to highlight the fact that we have the local press, and we've got to be moving forward with them on board, and not to exclude them for whatever reason that officers may have with the local media. That's for them to take up, and I would hope this committee would reaffirm that we do use the local press, and in this case in Stranraer, people do rely on that as a means of getting information out. On the other one, Chair, we do need, and it was reaffirmed last night in terms of the decision that we took at full council last Thursday, that the project will be broken into two, in that the priority will be for the opening of Church Street, provided that is safe to do so. And I think we've got to make that a priority, and we've got to look for a timeline. And it was Alan Hewitt that did advise the Community Council last night that he will have a report on the 5th, I believe it was the date, and he should have a response, or hopes to have a response, by the 12th of July. And he mentioned something that it could be a timeline of anything between 5 and 6 months. I would hope that we could maybe look at that and accelerate that with a contractor, if that is the contractor that is given the awarded the work to do, because the people of Stranraer are looking for that Church Street to be reopened with regards to the George Hotel and the effect that's having on Church Street being closed. In terms of that, and there was an issue, and it's in this report, and that's under the car scheme, I believe, and that was the museum and how it's being delayed because of that. I think if that's the case, we've now got an ideal opportunity within the timescale referred to last night to move ahead with a museum and get that done, rather than looking at that in the future and maybe even closing Church Street again, if that's the case. So I think there needs to be a focus on that to move forward, as and when we've got the misfortune of having Church Street closed, and if that can be done during that period, rather than any further delay on that. There was a number of issues on the car spend or the cars project last night, and I'm looking at this under 3.7, and I'm looking at a £541,392, yet the actual spend to March was £39,094. I wonder if any reason for this is the people not taking up the opportunity in the car scheme. Owner's contribution, 0 up to March. And I just wonder if there's anything wrong with the scheme that's putting people off from using it, and if we could have maybe some explanation on that. Similarly, in 3.12, Chair, and property grants and 60 inquiries across the conservation area. Can I ask if that conservation area could be extended in any way to bring in properties that could be brought into use, empty property brought into use, and also buildings that would affect the economic environment. And I can think of one at the end, at the edge of Stranraer on the 77, that definitely has an economic impact, on the and people coming into the town. So there's a number here, Chair. I would finish, just on and reference again to the smart group. And yes, we've now got that up and running. I think there's been, I'm sure Ross could give more detail to this one, 3 or 4 meetings. Numbers slightly dropped, but it's to define what the remit of the smart group is. Questions have been asked at the meeting, and Ross did say that further questions after meetings. It's really, I don't think we've defined what the remit is of the smart group, whether it's a council or a standalone organisation. So I think we need some clarity in that.
Okay, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and run through the points that Councillor Scobie's raised. In relation to the comms and obviously utilisation of the local media, Ian McKenzie, the Communications and Policy Manager, was there last night at part of the Community Council meeting and made commitments to look into how that could be improved and rectified. As Councillor Scobie quite rightly mentioned, the project has been disaggregated into 2 parts, one looking at the stabilisation and safety of the George Hotel with the view to obviously reopening Church Street as soon as possible. My understanding, following obviously the discussion last night, is that the tender exercise that's been undertaken and expedited will come back to Property and Architectural Services on Friday, and then that will be assessed with a view that obviously that will come back for a sort of a delegated sort of decision-making process on Friday the 12th of July, bearing any sort of other issues that crop up as part of that process. So we are looking at expediting that and moving that one quickly as possible. In relation to obviously the CARS programme, my understanding is obviously that the funding as outlined in 3.7 was reflected at the time of creating the report. There is an additional claim that's being submitted to the Scottish Government in the very near future, so that will amend that particular programme, and we'll come back and obviously try and provide some additional information to members. In relation to the property grants, in terms of extending the area, that's something obviously that we'd need to have discussion with Historic Environment Scotland, because obviously they're overseeing the actual sort of CAR scheme, and we've already agreed obviously to certain parameters and remits, but we will explore whether there is any opportunity to extend that particular area. With regard to the smart group, I'll let Melissa just provide members with an update with regard to obviously that remit.
So we've met with the smart group and we've discussed with them the process for proceeding to undertake a piece of work to do a town centre audit, to develop an action plan. In terms of the remit of the group, what we do find elsewhere in the region is that community-led groups tend to have a stronger sense of ownership of the action plans and the visions that emanate from these types of work. So I think that that's an issue that we need to explore with them further.
Ready to come back in, Will?
Aye, Chair, it's just a point that I missed, and it's on the Harbour Masters building, and while that was part of the car scheme, the other part wasn't, and that's the adjunct to the actual clock tower. And it's really just, and it was re-emphasised last night, the handover period. The building has been completed, all the Harris fencing has been taken away, all the building works, but we seem to be a hiatus in when are we going to hand this over? Because originally The officer attending in Stranraer said it would be the 1st of April. Well, we're now by the 1st of July, and it doesn't feel that we're anywhere nearer to handing this over. Not perhaps, as was said in the report here, at an asset transfer stage, but at least to be handed over and opened, as is said in here, as a hub, and similar to what we had as a tourist information centre. We need that opened, and we need it opened immediately. And I hope there'll be an emphasis from this committee today to say, let's get that done. Notwithstanding the council's policy, and it's no DG1 or a Norwest campus, it's 4 walls, and if there's something drastic along, then we need to know about it. But if it's not, let's get it handed over.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we'll note that and move that one forward and look into the exact reasons as to why the handover has been delayed and come back and provide members with further information.
Steve, do you want to comment?
Yeah, Chair, if I could. I'm aware of that situation, and we are applying pressure to get that handover process concluded as soon as possible. I think everybody is fully aware of the necessity to get that concluded, because we have this community development trust waiting in the wings to come in and take occupancy of the building and bring it into a use which is going to add value to to the town centre and to the visitor economy. Could I just pick up on another point as well that Councillor Scobie raised, and again just to give assurance that we will be looking as far as we can to dovetail the works on the museum with the works that need to be done to the George, to take advantage, as you say, of that window of opportunity is probably the wrong way to put it, but we have that unfortunate circumstances with the road closure just now. We'll be looking to accelerate the procurement process within the museum, with the museum works, to try to see if that can be concluded at the same time as the road is currently shut.
Okay, Rose, then Ivor.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to thank the officers very, very much for coming over last night. And I think, we can't emphasise enough that appearance has done so much to raise the community. And I think it's showing a very positive way forward. And I think what I saw in the meeting, although there is frustration, and I echo a lot of what Willie's just said about the frustration about communication and the length of time the clock tower has taken to hand over, because the world arrives in a couple of days, and people are saying, well, why is that beautiful building not happening at the moment? I've just got a couple of points that I can, if I could bring up. One is the SMART group was a grassroots community-led group, and I think it's sort of growing itself, really. Numbers always diminish, and we were expecting that, but I think there's still a lot of support for the spirit of the group. And I think the group have decided to constitute, and I think that will help answer a lot of the questions that are arising. The constitution process will help to formalise how they will interact with the council. So we are going to call another meeting, although it's holiday time, we will call a meeting very shortly. My other question was echoing 3.12 regarding all the interest and the people that decided to withdraw. My question is, what happens to them then? What happens to those buildings then? And how much are we encouraging people to be able to pursue it?
Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, I do not have the detail to provide, obviously, Councillor Surtees with the answer to that question. I will have a chat with the CARS project officer and ensure that, obviously, Pam Taylor, who's working on the CARS scheme, contacts and sort of speaks with all the elected members within the ward to ensure that that information can be passed across.
And I believe she's coming to the Community Council meeting also, so that's helpful.
Thank you. Ivor.
Thank you, Chair. George Tell, this report sort of updates us, and it could have been appended at full council. The one thing that I would say is the communications part, I think, is essential, because if members locally had been told that this is the reason this is happening, rather than going, it will be done. If it had been done, I think they could have allayed some of the fears or concerns of the residents and businesses, and they knew that things were actually in the process of moving. I suppose the other thing that I would say from a scrutiny point of view on this one, when we purchased the building, I take it we did a structural assessment of it. What's happened in the meantime that's made it unsafe, and it's maybe something that we need a full report back on to this committee to look at how we make sure this doesn't happen again, that we don't actually buy assets and let them rot away or whatever's happened in this occasion, or remove something and make it unsafe, because we shouldn't be doing this. We don't want to see another one if we other buildings in the future that we need to do. So maybe we need to have a right good look at this one, whether it, and I think as a committee we should do it. If it needs to go to scrutiny, if we can't resolve it, then maybe that's somewhere it should go. But at first point, we should be actually, as a committee, looking at it to learn lessons and make sure that we can actually improve the way we look at these projects in the future.
Steve.
Chair, thanks. Yes, if I could just provide some initial response to those points. First of all, it is our intention to bring back a detailed report setting out the options for the way forward on this once we get by this initial stabilisation phase. So we will be bringing a further detailed report setting out the options for the future of the building, and that will include some of the background to this. When the building was purchased, there was due diligence done at that time. When purchasing a property of that age that was already deteriorating, which was the main reason for the justification for the council to intervene in terms of dealing with an owner whose property was significantly deteriorating already. We then faced a situation where when we started on site with the contract to do the initial strip out works and asbestos removal, that uncovered a significant number of what had been hidden defects internal to the building. That then caused basically the building site to be closed for health and safety reasons whilst further structural investigations were undertaken. During that period, which was then leading into the winter, there has been evidently further deterioration due to weather-related issues in the intervening period. So it's a whole combination of things that leave us in the situation we are where we are. And what we're trying to do now is to get a clear strategy in terms of how we respond to and deal with the situation that we currently face.
We'll come back in, Ivan.
Just a wee bit of advice then, maybe whenever you buy a building, make it wind and watertight, and then you can work away at the rest of it at your leisure and you've no deteriorating after that. But if you're buying it and letting it, the water and wind and whatever cause issues, then that's when you've got trouble.
Okay, Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair. It's just, it came as a bit of a surprise again. I mean, we seem to be getting surprised all the time in here, I don't know why, but we had this last week at full council about this building, and we now seem to have more information in here, which I'm sure at the time of the full council meeting would have been available. And another thing I think that might have been helpful is we refer to the structural engineer's report. Would it not have been useful maybe to have that appended so that we could have had a wee look at that for a bit of further scrutiny? And then it says here at 3.18, the current condition is unsafe for operatives to install internal propane. But I thought the way we were going to go forward potentially was the internal propane, so that we can speed up the opening of the road.
I think the Chief Executive gave his assurance at the full council that would be the way to go forward. But Steve?
Yeah, this is why we've had to now engage with a specialist contractor who is also a demolition contractor, because the extent of those works is far in excess of what was originally anticipated when the original contract to start that wind and watertight works was let.
Okay, Willie, do you want to come on?
Yeah, Chair, it's just to the point that Ivor's making, and there is a significant point. We've had this building for 18 months, and for a long period of time, and one of the officers referred to it last night, for a long period, almost a year and more, nothing was happening to it. So I think that there should be, the whole purchase process, what happened after, should be scrutinised, and preferably by the scrutiny committee. But if this committee wants to, or the new committee wants to take it on board, it needs full reporting. Because for long enough that building lay, and not wind and watertight, nor was it attempted to make it wind and watertight, and it may have been something to do with what was found in the building as to the safety or the structural defects. But there was a long period where nothing actually happened. And we constantly, as local members, were asking what's happening, and we weren't being told. So there is a big issue in terms of communication, but there's an even bigger issue. There are properties attached to the George Hotel on either side. And Steve will recall on the 22nd of May, I got an assurance that the businesses would be contacted. They weren't contacted until late June. So there is issues here in terms of how process and how we responded and everything else to people who are seriously concerned, not only in terms of the George Hotel building, but their own buildings that are attached to it. And we're not getting the information to them. And that's paramount to keep people fully up to date, fully informed and everything else. So, Chair, I don't think we've covered ourselves in any glory. And I referred to it on numerous occasions, damned if we did and damned if we didn't, because the building was falling into a state when we did purchases, and thankfully it was not on council money but the Scottish Government. But we need to be moving a lot quicker, both in terms of getting Church Street open and to deal with the building and what we're going to do once the internal is stripped out and whatever is done to it. We need to be communicating again with the stakeholders, and the stakeholders are the whole of the people of Stranraer. We need to be engaging with them. Melissa spoke of how we're going to do that now. So I think scrutiny, and if Ivor's moving that, I'll be happy to second it. We do need this whole thing scrutinised, and the unfortunate thing, we can't bring those that were responsible to account, and maybe the jail they should be in.
I was always told it was always sunny in Stranraer as well. Steve, do you want to answer that?
Chair, yeah, it's just essentially to assure members that this is a priority. We have had to, and I have reprioritised workloads within what could be referred to as a team, but in reality is only one or two people. So we have prioritised, and this project is receiving priority attention from our side. We have also brought back in-house the technical oversight of this project, which previously rested with external architects. So again, for us to be able to exercise greater control over that work and over the quality of it, we have brought that back in-house, so that there is a significant resource that is being applied to this, and I certainly wouldn't like to see that being diverted into looking back and providing that justification. We will provide more detailed information as part of that future committee report that we bring forward, but certainly for myself and the team, the priority is we are where we are with it, and we need to move it forward.
Okay, nobody else. So we go to the recommendations, and members were asked to note 2.1, and at 2.
I don't think I got an answer to the is it within our gift or possible to extend the conservation area where there's economic benefit to maybe outwith the conservation area.
I think Simon said they'd have to talk to Historic Environmental Scotland before that could easily be answered. Okay. 2.2 is to agree to receive further updates on progress on key projects, and I think just to add into that at the appropriate committee, because what we've discussed today.
Chair, I think we should have an additional recommendation, and listen to what Councillor Scobie said. Maybe it should go to the scrutiny committee, because when you actually think, it's not just what we've done here, but it's the property services. If they've been in and done their part of due diligence, looking at the building, etc., we're actually buying a building that we possibly didn't have revenue in place to make it wind and watertight, etc. at the time. So maybe we should actually have a look at this process at the scrutiny committee, because it covers more than just one service committee, to look at the process we have into buying buildings, to make sure that when we do go there, A, we have the revenue to maintain it, and B, we have an end use for it as well, because it's no point in just buying a building and leaving it empty. So I think we should look at a scrutiny review at the appropriate committee, which I think, based on what Councillor Scobie said, would be scrutiny committee.
Steve, you want to give some advice on that? I don't have an issue with it.
It's really a matter for members. As I say, my priority at the moment is to make sure that we focus our staff, our limited staff resource on moving this project forward. Clearly, if members wish for enhanced scrutiny of what happened previously, then happy to participate in that. There has been, as you know, a number of quite fundamental changes which are being put in place as part of the transformation programme around our whole property process, and getting that embedded as part of the new property and facilities management structure, which also involves introducing quality processes and revisiting a lot of our processes around capital program investments, and also property acquisitions. So the situation really has moved on considerably since the council first agreed to purchase this building, which was some 3 or 4 years ago. But again, we can cover all of that in any future report.
The clerk wishes.
Just as members who were there will perhaps recall, Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee last week put forward a number of possible topics for scrutiny reviews as part of their discussions at that meeting. So just to place your decision in a bit of context, there are a number of topics being put forward for the decision later.
Rather than just add another recommendation, it says 2.2 is agree to receive further updates on progress on key projects, and I've said at the appropriate committee. I mean, it's up to scrutiny what they want to do because of what's basically happened at the last committee meeting, and I think, you know, buying buildings and things like that could be part of that list. And if they're already doing that, why would we ask them to do the same thing that they're actually doing? You know, so rather than have another alternative recommendation, just to agree to receive further updates on progress on key projects at the appropriate committees. Okay.
Chair, can I just add that again last week at full council under transformation, we did agree to a future capital strategy, but that's actually going to be an internal session. So members will have the opportunity to raise these concerns within that environment as well. So it's just to add that to the debate of today, to know that on the 28th of October, with the Head of Finance and Procurement, we are going to be looking at a future capital strategy. So there's plenty of opportunity. Well, there is opportunity. Maybe not plenty, but there's opportunity. Thank you.
So is everybody satisfied with that suggestion?
It is within the gift of this committee to refer the matter to scrutiny, and I would much prefer that we refer the matter with particular reference, and when we can be specific and learn lessons. God, I sound like Les Jordan learn lessons from the way that it was done, and just what due diligence wasn't carried out at the time of purchase, and we can learn from that. So I would see no reason why it can't be an added recommendation or agreed by this committee to refer the matter to scrutiny.
And as I said, I've got no issues with referring it to scrutiny, but obviously there's a long list of things that scrutiny are actually going to be looking at as well.
But it's for them to prioritise.
The recommendations will be 2.0, the contents of the report, 2.2, agree to receive further updates on the progress in key projects, and again at the appropriate committee because there may be other issues, and 2.3 to send to scrutiny the report on the George Hotel. Yeah. Agreed? Okay, members, we'll go to item 12 then, which is Plan Performance Framework Annual Report. The purpose of this report is to present to members for the consideration of draft planning. Performance Framework Annual Report for 2018-19 prior to submission to the Scottish Government. This is an annual report that comes forward for our scrutiny to take forward. The Planning and Building Standing Manager will take any questions on the report unless you've got anything to add to it, Steve.
No, Chair, nothing to add.
David, you got anything to add?
Nothing to add, Chair. Thanks.
Members? Stephen?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, no, I was just reading with interest on page 207, under point 7, just to do with, well, there's two things actually. Number 6 on that page, it talks about the drop in number of applications which were valid on receipt, which is quite a significant drop, and the sort of the speculation as to what the possible explanations would be. I don't know if either of those satisfactorily explains it, but I mean, obviously it's one of these things that's not maybe, you know, the clear reason for it maybe isn't entirely known, but that's just something to note. But on point 7, it's interesting, I suppose, that all of the dismissed appeals were cases where Planning Applications Committee had refused planning permission in accordance with officer recommendations, which suggests that the officers had given a fair assessment of the so, but it does then sort of raise the question about, do members need to reflect on whenever they make variations to the officer's recommendations that they have, you know, the right weight behind their reasons for going against that. So that's maybe just something for us all to reflect on. And the last thing was just on the enforcement cases at point 9 at the bottom of 207 and over the page. Is that, I mean, effectively it sounds like a plea for a bit more resource, which I'm sure a lot of members would be sympathetic with, but I don't really know what the level of resource would be to sort of meet the number of enforcement cases that we need to deal with, because obviously there's a bit of prioritisation has to go on, so that's maybe something we would have to consider in the round when it comes to budget setting or reorganisation.
David?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, basically this is a factual report of what happened in 2018-19, and yes, Councillor Thompson has picked up on a number of very salient points there. Nothing further to add, really.
Thank you. John?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Page 209, just a quick observation. The age profile of the staff in the planning department's a bit concerning, with so many, shall we say, nearer the retirement age than starting out age.
David?
Indeed, yes. Well, we do actually have 2 who are in their 70s, believe it or not, which probably does skew that slightly. I'll hide it well. But yes, I think probably the key thing to note there is actually under 30 we have only 2, and obviously there is a need for looking at career progression, career succession, and unfortunately none of us are getting any younger. So that also follows through into the next item as well, where there is very much an ageing workforce, I'm afraid.
Jim Dempster?
Thanks, Chair. I think on page 190 at the top of the page, I think we've already recognised, but it's great to see that our staff are winning awards for quality and planning. I think that's an important acknowledgement of the standard of staff that we have, or the standard or quality of staff we have. As far as Stephen Thompson's point is concerned, he's right. Officers apply policy, but it's always elected members that have the right to change that if they see fit, using local knowledge, whatever, and it's then up to whoever to challenge that. I would never try and say that local members or elected members shouldn't have the right to change officers' recommendation. I would point to what I said last week at full council. The local review body decisions are now reflecting the fact that on one hand, as Stephen says, our officer's recommendations to committee are just about spot on, and yet we're overturning, according to this last year, 75% of the appeals that go to local review bodies. There's something wrong with that, and I'm pleased to see in the report that we're talking about having another training session for local review body members, and I think that's useful. And the only other thing I would ask about, and it's simply because it reflects badly on the council's the legacy issue, where we're not determining within an appropriate or an agreed timescale. Obviously reasons for it, but I think we have to take some stringent measures to ensure that if it's no us that are responsible for the delay, for example, Scottish Water, they used to be no very helpful in providing responses at an appropriate time, and we had to sort of always push Scottish Water, and if it's something like that that's reflecting badly in the council, we need to find a mechanism to deal with it. But they're just observations, Chair, not necessarily the response.
Okay, thank you for those observations. Members, if we go to the recommendations, we're asked to consider the draft plan and performance framework annual report and agree to its submission to the Scottish Government. Is that agreed? Thank you. Next one we go into is the Building Standards Review Update Report by Head Economy and Development. This report provides members with an update on progress with implementing the recommendations from the external review of building standards and the proposed restructuring of the Building Standards Service, and seek approval for the associated staffing changes subject to the budget realignment. This was discussed at previous EEI committees, and I'm sure members are up to date with all of this. The Planning and Building Standards Manager and Building Standards Team Leader will take any questions on the report unless you've got anything to add, Steve.
Nothing to add, Chair. No.
David?
Nothing to add, Chair.
John Young?
Yes, thanks again, Chair. I think the chart at the bottom, the table at the bottom of page 223 is not doing the planning department any great service. Looking at that table, staff costs are embedded in the overall expenditure. The income is greater than the overall expenditure, but it's showing the net income as a negative. The net income is actually a plus, it's a positive. The department made a fairly healthy profit, and that's being hidden by that table.
Chair, yes, that's actually just the way accountancy is actually written, with the positive and negative way. But yes, in plain English, that is £356,000 that is to the benefit of the council as a result of the service.
Thanks. The other interesting part, when I talked about age profile, is the top of that 4-year modern apprenticeships, and I think it would be excellent if we could get further development on that. But I would ask, if we get modern apprentices in this department, is there any way we can hang on to these once they're fully qualified? Are they?
Unfortunately, John, I think under employment law you can't hold on to people if you train them. We've got to provide training for people, obviously, but under employment law we can't hold on to people that have golden handcuffs and things like that. That would be against that type of thing. David?
Yes, Chair, you're correct in that regard. I mean, certainly the aspiration is, if we take them through the 4 years and they have found a good training and a good place to work, that they would want to remain. We do actually have a pretty good track record across all of planning building standards of taking people in and retaining them where they've come locally and stayed locally and grown through. Probably the bigger difficulty is if you've got somebody who's come in from elsewhere and then retaining them after they're trained up.
Sean?
Just a kind of request, really, just in item 12, and then there's item 13. It actually, obviously, there's been a bit of change in the plan, and we have the structure there, and also building standards have had a review. Just wondered if we could maybe have names beside, something sent out to members, because there's been a number of changes in both the planning structure and building standards.
David, is that an action you can take to send out to members that the structure of the planning department and names to roles?
Yes, that's no problem, Chair.
Okay, Ivor?
Chair, it's with regard to, is it 3.3.7, 3.3.8, the verification process. How close are we to losing that? And will we be able to turn that round in time so that we don't lose it? You know, if we're training staff up, are we going to hit those targets quick enough to make sure that Scottish Government or whoever's watching your back say, you're doing all right, and we'll keep you doing the verification just now? But, you know, how close are we to losing it? I've heard that there are serious concerns within the department about this and the possible loss of this, but I just wondered, are we able to actually address the points?
David?
Thank you, Chair. Ultimately, that's a matter for the Scottish Government's Building Standards Division, the BSD, to decide. But to put it in context, at the BSD's request, they came down and met with us last November and expressed concerns about our performance at that time. We've obviously put a number of things, you've seen the action plan that's on the agenda here, in place. We brought down the consultants who had a good look at what our issues were and how to address them. Steve and myself are going to be meeting with them in early August, but the fact of the matter is they will be auditing us this autumn, because next year that's when our 3 years expires for the verification role. I think in all honesty, I can't see us being able to retain another 3-year period. Given the drop in performance, we're unlikely to, by this autumn, have turned things around sufficiently. Our aspiration in reality is to try and get 2 years. The very worst situation is that they see no mechanism to improve things. They're not confident that we can turn things around in a reasonable time period. They could actually take away the verification role. So in that instance, you've got the double whammy. You can't charge any fees, but you have to keep the statutory service. So that really is a situation you do not want to be in. They did put 3 authorities into special measures, Edinburgh, Glasgow and Stirling. We went up and met with Edinburgh, and having seen what they had to go through, and they spent about £1 million to try and retain their verification role. They got it for 2 years. They bring in 4 million as opposed to our 1 million, but you can see the level of investment they actually had to make that a reality. So yes, there is an urgency to this, and that is my concern, that we do need to demonstrate to the BSD that we have an action plan in place. We are putting things in place as quickly as possible.
Do you want to add anything to that, Steve?
Chair, yeah. The other element to that is that we also have to evidence that our action plan is having an impact. So we are seeing the key performance indicator that the Building Standards Division focus on, which is KPO1. We are seeing improvements in that, and that's one of the pieces of evidence that David and I will be able to provide them with. The other point, just to emphasise what David was saying there, is about engaging with the Building Standards Division. So in addition to the meeting that we've got programmed with them, we have involved them in the progress of this review. So we consulted with them on the scope before we put it to the consultants. We also consulted with them on the selection of the consultants. So they have been quite well engaged with us in this process. So we're doing everything that we can to kind of bring them with us and hopefully get a positive outcome from their audit process.
Thank you. Stephen and Mal.
Thanks, Chair. And can I just thank Councillor Young for actually asking the question initially about that table, because at first glance when I looked at that, I just, as a layperson, I'm not an accountant or a bookkeeper or whatever, so the brackets and the minus signs to me just look like a sum. Do you know what I mean? And I thought, oh well, I could have checked the arithmetic and you'd never have got to minus 356,000. But anyway, I think that there is something to be said, more of a general point, which is like, when a figure like that's presented, I don't know what audience that's written for, because you know, the fact that a table normally should be legible, easy to read and sort of self-explanatory, and that one, it's sort of like saying, well, unless you actually know the conventions about putting brackets or minus signs, you would never look at that initially and say, all right, we actually made money out of that, until you read the next line. So thanks to Councillor Young for following that up. But is there something that we can maybe think about whenever we're thinking about the audience for the papers? Because it's us that reads these papers, maybe not so much the accountants. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, I think it's an issue for the whole council, committees and structures when they get the financial reports to them, to make sure they are of a standard and everybody understands them. And it's something I've mentioned in the pre-meeting, that we're actually making a profit. You obviously didn't listen to me, but there you go. But we'll certainly be looking at how we do that right across council.
Chair, I'm happy to feed that back to the head of finance.
Chair, can I just say that's been fed back for the last 2 years. 2 years we've been asking for that, and it's still not changed. So it's great that you're going to feed it back.
If you're coming, ask me first. Don't shout over me, okay? Right, Michael.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Well, as an accountant, I'll take the chance to answer for the head of finance. That is a balancing figure. But anyway, we'll move on. That's the way they're displaying it. It took me, despite the fact that I'm trained as an accountant, a good few months sitting in this chamber to figure out how these reports quite often are presented, because even to myself at times it can be baffling. But we're talking about potentially, am I correct in saying, losing £1 million of income? I mean, it's absolutely imperative that we get this sorted out. Now, we're on about resources. Well, on the basis that building control makes a surplus of £356,968, why are we having to have this discussion at all? Because surely it's the other departments that building standards is subsidising that should be taking the pain.
I'll let Steve answer that one.
Thank you, Chair. The building standards budget forms part of the wider service budget and departmental budget. So any realignment of those budgets has, as you say, has got a knock-on consequence on other services. That is what we're proposing to do as the next step here. But I think, as the report points out, at the present time, the only source that we've got of additional funding internally within that service is the planning service, and we've just received the report on the performance of the planning service. So would be unwilling to recommend that we take a big chunk of resource away from the planning service and put it into building standards. So it's got to be looked at wider across the new. We now have a new wider service that's been established as part of the council restructuring. So as part of the establishment of the new revenue budgets, we've got the chance to look at where there are opportunities to realign those budgets to ensure that building standards is properly resourced. If we're unable to do that, then we'll bring a further report forward to say we've done that exercise and we still have a deficit of whatever remains.
Sean, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just, taking on board what Steve is saying, I think then we have an opportunity to send a strong message that we want that to be looked at on a wider perspective and to actually get the required resources into building standards. So maybe if we can look at a strongly worded recommendation that would go with this report, just to say that, this committee would like to see that happen.
Okay, I'm happy to put that in as a recommendation on that. Malcolm?
Just to come back and just agree entirely, I think that it's important we put something to that effect in here. I've always found in my own personal experience that having different areas of a business cross-subsidising other ones is never a good place to be.
So that will go to the recommendations. We've asked to note 2.1, note 2.2, and I think if we add in there that this committee recommends that the realignment of the budget to improve the opportunities for building standards, resources would be included in that, and then note 2.3. Happy with that? Very much. We'll now go to item 14, which is the Director's End of Year Assessment of Business Plan, Performance, Economy, Environment, Community Directed. Report by Director Communities, Director Economy and Resources. This report provides elected members with the Director's End of Year Assessment of the 2018-19 and the End of Year Progress and Delivery of the 2018-23 Business Plan for the Economy, Environment, Infrastructure Directorate. The Director of Business Manager will take any questions on the report unless you've got anything to add to it. Steve?
Nothing to add, Chair. Thanks.
Sure.
Nothing to add, Chair.
Okay, members' questions? Ivor?
Chair, I read through this and I thought there was more red in this than in the ballot box. I noticed some of the things in here were moving, it was one or two of the employability ones. Now, if you read the narrative, this should be a big green, because there's less people to help to get into these positions, because we're actually, it must be working. Therefore, instead of hitting the target of 150, I think one of the targets we were getting 75 people going through this service. And it's my understanding from the reading of the narrative, it was the fact that we've a reduction in numbers. You know, people aren't there requiring the service. So I think rather than coming out red, we need to look how we actually tell people this is actually a good news story. There are some that do cause me concern, which actually are in green, but have short-term trend of going down. And I always think the ones with a short-term trend of going down, I think some of them are road repairs, potholes, etc. If you don't address them when you see them starting to go down, that's when they start to become a longer-term trend and you have bigger concerns with that. It's a full report. I've read through most of them and there are mitigations in here, so we'll keep an eye on this. I think there are wee concerns at 23 of the indicators, but some of them are positive stories, are on the red status, so I think we'll keep an eye and hopefully fewer in the red next year and we adjust the figures to reflect what we need to actually have in the figures.
I think you're right, Oliver. Some of the key employability ones are we're now at the stage where we're actually looking at the hard to reach as opposed to the things. There are obviously the discussions that we had at full council about PDRs and things like that need to be improved. I don't know if you want to answer any of those, Stuart. Take them on board as is. Okay. Any other members? Okay, we'll go to the recommendations of members. We're asked to review, which we have done. Scrutinise 2.2. We've agreed the amendments to the business plan appendix 4 and note 2.4. Agreed? Thank you. We'll now move on to item 15, which is review employability service, no one left behind, report by Head of Economy and Development. This report provides an update on recent partnership and policy announcements on proposal for future delivery of Scotland's employability services and outlines the opportunities and challenges for local authorities. No one left behind. The review of employability service was published by the Scottish Government on the 5th of December 2018 and sets out the Scottish Government aim to work with local authorities and partners to develop a new, more integrated model for funding employability services. This follows the signing of the Scottish Local Government Partnership Working Agreement for Employability on the 5th of December and it asks members to note and agree the approach to implementing the funding stream. The Employability and Skills Manager will take any questions on the report, unless you've got anything to add to it. Steve?
Nothing to add, Chair.
Members? Okay, nothing there, so shall we go to the recommendation then? We've asked to note 2.1, agree 2.2, note 2.3, and agree 2.4. It will be a future committee. Thank you. Item 16 is Economic Leadership Group Update, report by Head of Economy and Development. This report provides members with an update on the reinvigoration of the region's Economic Leadership Group and asks members to note the refreshed terms of reference and membership and the appointment of a new chair. It also asks us to write a formal vote of thanks to the outgoing chair, Maureen McKenzie, as part of that Economic Leadership Group. I'm pleased to say that as part of their ongoing project, that they have seen producing the region as a carbon neutral area as one of their main key performance indicators. Have you got anything to add to Steve?
Nothing to add, Chair. No.
Members? Ivor?
Chair, why is it needing reinvigorated? I would have thought this area we should have enough people who are wanting to drive this forward. Without actually having to reinvigorate the group.
The group had a changed membership and a changed leadership because the membership had consistently been refreshed and they hadn't actually managed to achieve a common purpose. So they had stood down and the last 2 meetings had been cancelled, and they felt themselves that they needed to take a step back and understand what it is that they wanted to do and refresh the membership accordingly. So it's been led by the group themselves.
So what we're being told there, if I've understood it, the membership was always changing, so they couldn't get up and going. So what we've done is we've went away and refreshed the membership to get them going again. So how's this going to work this time?
Yeah, alongside the membership refresh, they've refreshed the terms of reference as well. So what they've done now is they've changed the way that people can join. So previously there's a core group who have been there since the very start, and this is new to us. So we've, as Employability, we've just taken it on. The focus of the group has shifted somewhat towards skills and towards being a carbon neutral region. So the core group wanted to look at the terms of reference. So we held a couple of workshops at which they changed the terms of reference so that people can't just turn up to the group. People have to be invited to join, and people have to commit to attending the group a certain number of times a year. So basically, they've tightened the governance to make the group more constructive and purposeful.
Okay. So, John?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. With SOCEP being fully implemented in about 8 months' time, is there not a lot of duplication with SOCEP, with this leadership? And I'm just wondering, for a personal point of view, does the Council provide funding to enable this group to represent the region in outside bodies, exhibitions, etc.?
So the 2 questions there. There's no funding provided to the group. We facilitate the group and we provide the secretariat for the group, but the group all are self-funding. I think the only body they're on, and Chair will correct me if I'm wrong, is South of Scotland Alliance externally. This is a private sector group and it's entirely Dumfries and Galloway led. The private sector representation on the South of Scotland Economic Partnership is across the south of Scotland, so I think there's an element of duplication there, and I think we need to be careful that it's aligned, but this group is entirely focused on this region.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and obviously Dumfries and Galloway need to understand what the outcomes and objectives of the South of Scotland Enterprise Agency will be in the future, but we also need to be there with private companies shouting our corner, basically. Okay, now let's go to the recommendations. We've asked to note 2.1, note 2.2, and agree 2.3, and if we can organise that, we'll get that signed, okay? Thank you. We'll now move on to item number 17, the South of Scotland Regional Skills Investment Plan. This report is to provide elected members with information on the South of Scotland Regional Skills Investment Plan, launched on the 24th of June 2019 by Skills Development Scotland, and to provide information on how local accountability arrangements for the plan will be developed. The Employability Skills Manager will take any questions on the report, unless you've got anything to add to it.
Nothing to add, Chair.
Okay. Members? In which case we will go to the recommendations. We've been asked to note 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3. Agreed? We will now move on to item number 18, which is Business Loans Scotland Report by Head of Economy and Development. The purpose of this report is to update the Committee on the status of Business Loans Scotland and agree a procedural change to the operation of the fund. And it's mainly about the amendment to the Article of Association in which Business Loans Scotland actually operate to. I think it will be beneficial for Dumfries and Galloway to sign on to this. But have you got anything to add to it, Steve?
Nothing to add, Chair, and I'll take any questions.
Members? Ivor?
Chair, I'm not the greatest person to understand all this legal talk and these written resolutions and whatever they've got. What's going to be the benefit to Dumfries and Galloway? Are we going to see Dumfries and Galloway businesses able to actually access loans? And, according to the 351 there, we had 4 before, number of BLS issued. was 4. Now, is that shares that we own, or is it number of businesses that have accessed the business loan scheme, etc.? You know, because what I'm told when you go around these sort of, well, when I was on the regional advisory board, etc., there was no funding available for small businesses to get anything, not so much started, but if you'd started and you wanted to grow, there was nothing available. Have we actually, under the previous scheme or this new scheme, are we going to change the fact that small, medium enterprises who want to become big enterprises have somewhere to go to?
Steve?
Chair, thank you. Yes, I'll try and answer those. The first point, I think, is really about why we're doing this. What is the benefit to us from this change, this procedural change? And it's really the Business Loans Scotland was created some 3 or 4 years ago from an amalgamation of 3 regional business loan schemes that existed prior to that. So we were part of the South of Scotland business loan scheme that was effectively run through Scottish Enterprise. So the money that sat in each of the 3 regional funds was then put together into a new national scheme. What's happened now is that the government are making funding available through Business Loans Scotland for the next phase of their existence. Now, the purpose of Business Loans Scotland is to provide business loans of between 10,000 and up to 100,000, specifically targeted at small and medium enterprises. So it is support that is available to small and medium-sized businesses in the region. It will continue to be available, albeit it's now to be funded by this new Scottish Government money that's coming into Business Loans Scotland. The change to the Articles of Association is actually to allow those organisations that originally transferred their funds in to actually take it back out. So we will now be able to, subject to the change being approved by all of the constituent authorities, we'll be able to take that money, or what's left of it, back out of the fund. Now, there is a negotiation to be done there, because that money may have to be reused for the original purposes that it was intended. So we would look at reusing that, possibly to provide a small grant scheme to replace the small grants program that we used to run that came to an end. So that's the purpose of this.
Chair, well, if you're looking for something, I would rather see a loan fund, maybe 0% or something, but we could always keep that money there. People could get up, use it, pay it back, and then we could use it for another business. If we give a grant scheme, once it's gone, it's gone. And I think if we could use it to allow businesses to grow, then recoup it and then recycle it, you know, I think that'd be a better idea.
We'll certainly bring the details of that forward, Chair.
Right, I think we need to get the money back first to make sure that we can go ahead with it. And Steve said we'll bring a report forward about how we actually get that. And I agree with you. You know, it's about the small business loans at the end of the day, and see where we can get that forward. Okay. Going to the recommendations. We're asking note 2.1, note 2.2, and approve 2.3. Okay. Finally, members, we're on to item number 19, which is Scottish Government Town Centre Fund, report by Head of Economy and Development. This report provides members with an update on the activities and milestones associated with the allocation of the award of £1,529,000 funding to the Council from the Scottish Government's £50 million Town Centre Fund, as agreed on the 14th of May 2019. The Environmental Manager and Team Leader Strategic Projects will take any questions on the report unless you've got anything to add to it. Simon?
Nothing to add, Chair.
Steve?
Nothing to add, Chair.
How dare I forget Melissa? Anything to add?
Nothing to add, thanks.
Okay. Members? Okay, so we go to the recommendations. We're asked to note 2.1, note 2.2, Agree 2.3 with the addition after Environment Infrastructure Committee or the next appropriate committee. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Can I at this stage, however, thank you for all of your support and your criticism and your challenge over the last couple of years, Economy, Environment Infrastructure Committee, and I look forward to seeing you in whatever future role that I take up. So thank you very much, and I'll close the meeting.